As Mark has mentioned, I'm actually based in Singapore now. I moved to Singapore last August, but I was living in Shanghai for about 14 years. When I first got to Shanghai in 2004, to pay my rent, I would go to my bank, which was ICBC. I would take out my money from the teller because I couldn't take out that much money from the ATM. I would put it in a paper bag. I would walk it across the street, and I would deposit it at Bank of China. That was, in my argument, the first use of mobile payments in China or Asia, predating Alipay by a long time. If I look forward to when I left last year in 2018, 14 years later, I would pay my staff using Alipay. I invested in a financial product from Baidu, and I exchanged expenses with friends using WeChat Pay. The entire nature of digital payments changed over the course of that 15 years, and I would argue will continue to change. So today, I'm going to look at a couple of different trends that we are seeing in the market across Asia. Just very briefly on Capron Asia, we are a market research and consulting company with offices in Singapore and Shanghai. And so these are the things that have caught our eye that we thought would be relevant for the audience here. First of all is this massive shift to digital. So the smartphone is now the tool of choice for billions of consumers across China, not just in, or across Asia, not just in China and India, but increasingly here in Southeast Asia as well. The move to real-time and faster payments. National payment infrastructures are going through a tremendous phase of modernization over the past decade, especially here in Asia, and that's having implications in terms of the products and services that banks are able to offer. Payments as infrastructure, but platforms and data to drive revenue. The model of using payment fees to drive revenue is changing rapidly. The players that are successful in the digital space are offering platform opportunities that are reliant more on the value-add products and services that we can put on top of payments, not on the payments themselves. And the coming challenge to cards. When we look at consumer cross-border payments, and I'm experiencing this now, my credit card from Singapore, I pay a 3% fee just to use it in Thailand, plus the merchant and the fee that they pay. So we're seeing changes there as well. Looking at digital, often when I display this slide, people say, no, there's something wrong with the formatting on the slide. There's no line on the US on the right, but that is actually to scale. When you look at what's happening in China around digital payments in 2017, the amount of payments that went across the network in China as compared to the US was incredibly magnitudes different. And that kind of illustrates the shift that we're seeing across Asia. The fact that people are using their devices to make payments. We're seeing that in the number of non-cash transactions across the region that are now representing a larger percentage of the overall cash transactions globally and then within the region. These are some global numbers that we have looking at non-cash transactions by region. And you can see, although the legend seems to have gone up, the emerging Asia and mature Asia Pacific account for a significant amount of this increase over the past 10 years, and only expected to increase as we go forward into 2020, 2021. When we look specifically at Asia, certainly around emerging Asia, we're seeing a lot of uptake, and this is not surprising. In places like Singapore or Hong Kong, the uptake of non-cash is not as rapid because in many of these places, cards have been the primary choice of non-cash transactions for many years. But in places like China, China to a certain extent has skipped credit cards and moved directly to digital payments on the back end. So there's this emerging Asia and the countries involved in that, including Thailand here, seeing tremendous uptake in digital payments. And this is all being driven by outsized growth in smartphone penetration and smartphone usage. When you look at smartphone penetration globally, according to the GSMA, it will top out at about 66% in 2020. In China, that number is meant to be 73%. And then across the region, when we look at many of the countries across the region, smartphones have become the device of choice. And it's unsurprising when you think about it. In China, you can buy a Xiaomi phone, which is one of the largest producers of smartphones, for around $100. And it's fully capable of presenting a QR code, which is an increasingly important part of transactions as well. In fact, QR codes have become the rage in China, most certainly, and then across Southeast Asia as well. In China, we did our first study on mobile payments in about 2010, 2011. And we had a big spreadsheet, and on the spreadsheet we had, Bank of China was working with China Mobile on an NFC-driven pilot in Chengdu. And the Bank of Shanghai was working with China UnionPay on an NFC-driven pilot in Shanghai. The challenge with NFC, though, is you need to have the hardware to support it, and it puts you beholden to the other players in that network. So for Alipay, who was the first company to kind of provide QR code payments in this space, they had the choice of working with a China Mobile or a China UnionPay, which lowers their market power significantly. They came up with the idea of using QR code payments. QR code payments are hardware independent. They don't require a big footprint on the phone to be able to either read or display a QR code. And they've been integral for facilitating that shift in places like China to digital payments in the offline scenario. There's two forms. If you're not, I think most of you here in Thailand are familiar with PromptPay, but in most cases, there's kind of two forms of these ways that these are presented. I'll talk about the one on the right first. This is a displayed QR code from your smartphone. So you pull up Alipay, you pull up WeChat, you pull up Grab, you pull up one of the other apps, and you display a dynamic QR code that changes every 20 seconds or so to maintain that security. The use case on the left is the more interesting one. It's a static QR code that the merchant has. So it's essentially like a Bitcoin wallet or just an account number. So you scan that and you're paying to the account. So it's the first case is kind of a request to pay, and then the second one is a credit transfer or a push. Sorry, the first one direct debit and the second one a credit transfer. The reason why the second one is so compelling is the fact that for a merchant to get set up with an account is very simple. As long as they have Alipay, they can produce one of these QR codes, they can print it out, and they can display it. And in many cases, this gentleman here is a fishmonger. You see merchants all across big cities like Shanghai and increasingly second and third tier cities, even in Tibet, that have QR codes that they're using to accept mobile payments. And that's incredibly empowering. It allows people access not only to financial services, but as we'll see, increasingly to payments, but increasingly a larger amount of financial services as well. All of the things that we can layer on top of those value propositions. Why QR code payments? Well, the big argument is that it's hardware independent. The cost to get set up on QR codes, either as a consumer or a merchant, is very small. The bank may have a small KYC process to go through. In the case of Alipay, you need to have a bank account, but then once you do the KYC through linking that bank account, you're in business, literally. And you can use a consumer account for a merchant account. It tends to be fast as well. In a card transaction in many countries, including China, if you're using a chip and PIN card in China, it's chip, PIN, and signature.